And are we live? It says we're live. Hello, everyone. We apparently are live here on our study group. I've been looking around for the button that says go live, and YouTube was not giving me that button. So it's kind of nice that at least I was able to get things running there. I think I see myself on that view. We can pause that. We can move this over now. Very, very good. Hey, chat room. Hello, everyone. So glad that we are here, especially since the button wasn't there. It's odd. I was ready to go live, and there was, where's the button? Where'd they hide it? It was hiding. It was hiding in the button. Okay, now it's telling me other things in the window. Would it now be a good time to do something? I have a feeling the problem was that it was way over there. It was just hidden. I got a challenge with my windows on my screen today. I'm not sure why I have a challenge with the windows on my screen, but there it is. We're going to pop out the chat and get rid of that one and put this one down here and put this over there. See, we got it going on. We got it here. Hope everybody's doing well. It is our last Network Plus study group of the calendar year. Can you believe it? We've gone through a year. It's the end of the year. So interesting. We are, though, planning to get through this today. So far, so good. This needs to be there. There we go. So I can see stream help. I can see the folks in the chat room. Hi, chat room. So nice to see you. We've got our mic set up. I'm checking my cameras. Everything looks good with cameras. We are recording down here. I've already done my intros for the podcast. The numbers on our streaming numbers look very good. They're exactly where they should be. So far, so good. Wow, Rad, you set up a Windows 95 virtual machine over the weekend. That sounds amazing. I have. Do I have it here? I might have it in storage. I have an old Mac that I need to bring out of storage and plug in and try that out. I think that would be fun. Having a little bit of that nostalgia over technology is kind of a fun thing to do at the end of the year. So we'll have to work through that. Thank you for admiring the setup. This configuration will change slightly once we finish our last study group of the year on Thursday. I believe I will be replacing the mixer. Bye, mixer. Mixer's going away, I think. Well, we will know once I replace it if it really does go away. I have a lot of testing to do. I have a new mixer. It's sitting over there. It's much smaller. It's much more capable. We will see how it works out. Maybe we'll make my voice sound really good. How you doing? This is the study group. And then we've got a new switcher. This switcher, this big behemoth that's sitting on my desk, going away. That one is going away because I already have the new switcher. It is in the rack. I don't even think you can see there is a red button down there. There it is. If I move out of the way, you can see a picture of me right there. So that new switcher is in the rack and ready to go. And it's a rack mounted switcher rather than being on my desk, which is kind of nice. And now I'm tangled in my chair. Let's untangle myself. So we have a lot. We have a lot of questions to go through. I have all brand new questions for Network Plus. If you've never joined us before, this is our pre-show. And if you would like to join us, I'll put up the URL on the screen, professormesser.com/QA, so that you can join us as well and answer questions. In fact, we have a question on the screen. You can submit your digital push pin into our map to see where people are joining from. Got some folks in Canada, got some folks in the US. Looks like the UK is checking in. Looks like more like Scotland. Thank you for being here. Man, this is a good time of year to be in Scotland, by the way. I was there for 2 weeks over a December time frame. About this time frame, just had the best time. Just a fantastic place to hang out. And got to see a lot of great, interesting things. I was there for business, but evenings and weekends were mine. It was really a lot of fun. But that's a good place to go to plug that in. Plus, once you're there and you're putting your digital push pin into our image here, not only do we get to see where you're connecting from, but we can also use this as a way to confirm that you're able to get in and answer the questions. Yes, the pre-shows are important. One of the reasons it's important, I plug in everything today, and because I've been adding these new things to the rack, I've been adding a couple new cables in preparation for the new mixer and the new video switcher, and for some reason, unplugged the monitor that I use. You can't really see it in my ear because it's in this ear. It's right here. So I usually have that there, and it's amazing. To have that audio right there. Well, I couldn't hear anything. So I had to stumble around and unplug a few things and get it running just before going live. So we're getting there. Did I get a new M4 Pro Mini yet? Nope. I'm not getting a Mini. I'm going to get the new Studio when it comes out. M4, the rumors are that an M4 Studio will be coming at the beginning of 2025. So I'm holding out on that one. I'm waiting to get the new Studio. I have an M1 Studio now. So an M4 Studio will just be an enormous upgrade. That's the idea. That's the plan. We will see how this works out. Although my M1 Studio is just running great. We're going to knock on something here real quick. No, it's super good. Don't tell it I said that. It's really running nicely. I'm very pleased with that particular system. It is held on and does an amazing job. It handles everything that we do here. It is my daily driver. It's fantastic. It's really, really nice. All right, we got less than a minute before we get started. It's amazing when things are all broken and you end up, not finding the right button or getting all of these things. Suddenly you don't have as much time as you normally have. But we're getting there. Wow, look at everybody checking in. Malk must be here. I see his button on the piece that I miss. I miss a chat somewhere. I feel bad when I miss things going by sometimes because it does get just a little bit hectic. Okay, we got our graphic up. There's Malk. Hey, Malk, good to see you. I saw you on the map before I saw you in the chat. Thanks for being here. So nice to everybody to show up. The Vevox code, you don't have to know it. All you have to know is professormesser.com/QA, and we will get started here in just a moment. In fact, now's a good time to do this. Here we go, everybody. Let's get started with the study group. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the December 2024 Professor Messer N10-009 Network Plus Study Group. This is the study group where I ask you questions that come directly from the CompTIA exam objectives, and we get to see if you know the answer to the questions that I've created for you. We do all new questions every single month. Or every single time we do one of these. Generally, they are once a month. And one of the things that I like to do is have you answer along with me. If you are here live, you can also participate. And one of the ways that you can do that is following along by popping open a new browser window and heading over to professormesser.com/QA. We just put up a map that we were able to plug in where people are connecting from. And as you can see, people are connecting to this live stream from all over the world. Thank you so much for joining us on our last Network Plus live stream of the year. We have one more live stream after this. It will be our Security Plus live stream on Thursday. Now that you're in here and can answer these questions that we're going to present, you've been able to put your digital push pin into our map of the world. Now let's see how well we can remember a question from last month. We're going to see if this actually works. So stay on the screen that you're on. If you see that digital push pin in front of you, you don't have to move. You just stay right on that screen. And a new question will magically appear on the screen. This next question asks, a user's workstation has received an API-IPA address. Which of the following would be the best next step to resolve this issue? Now, our standing rule in our chat room, please, is no answers in the chat room. Please, no hints in the chat room. Instead, you want to answer using the link on your screen. Go to professormesser.com/QA. So this question asks, a user's workstation has received an API-IPA address. Which of the following would be the best next step to resolve this issue? Would it be to add a gateway of last resort, enable STP on the user's switch, add a static route to the user's workstation, decrease the DHCP lease time, or update the default DNS server? Now, if you think you know that answer, again, please no answers in the chat room. Instead, you want to follow the link on your screen, go to professormesser.com/QA and lock in your question. We're going to come back to that question in just a moment. Well, thanks again for joining us. It's very difficult to do a live stream without folks being here on the live stream as well. So thank you so much for joining us. When we're not here on the live stream, of course, we have so many other things going on. You can certainly find us on our YouTube channel at professormesser.com/YouTube. We also have a weekly Network Plus pop quiz question that we send out over the service formerly known as Twitter. You can find that at professormesser.com/Twitter. And I believe I also made a link for professormesser.com/X. So you're good either way on that one. We also put it on Instagram, on LinkedIn. So there's lots of ways that you can find those weekly pop quiz questions for Network Plus. We got a lot that we're working on this side. And as many of you know, this is relatively timely. As many of you know who are working on your Network Plus certification, there are actually 2 different Network Plus exams that you could take right now to earn your Network Plus certification. You only need to take one of them, but there is a difference, slight difference in content between the two. And there is also a difference in when these exams will be available. So for example, one of the exams that you could take is the N10-008. That's the version number of the exam. This was released on September the 15th of 2021. This will retire on December the 20th of 2024. As we sit here today, it's December the 10th of 2024. Let me do the math. That's 10 days. So you have about a week and a few days to get this exam done if you have been studying for this version, the N10-008. So your window is closing relatively quickly. We need to make sure that you're able to pass this exam. Don't wait until the last day. Maybe wait until the next to last day. There will be a lot of people trying to get their exams done. So it may be also difficult to schedule yourself in to take this exam. These are all things you need to consider. After December 20th, in 10 days from today, this exam will no longer be available in the United States or in English-speaking countries. You will not be able to take this exam any longer. It will be retired. And this is just a normal process they follow to move from one exam version to the other. Now, the exam itself is 90 minutes in length, has a maximum of 90 questions. Your score should be a 720 to pass this exam. That is on a scale from 100 to 900. The exam itself consists of both multiple choice-based questions and performance-based questions. We will do both types of questions today, and we'll talk more about these in just a moment. Well, if the N10-008 disappears forever on December the 20th, what would we take for our Network Plus? Well, I'm so glad you asked. The newer version of the exam is the N10-009. This one was released back in June. So this has been around for about 6 months. We've really been working on this version of 009, and many people have already earned their Network Plus certification by taking the N10-009 exam. One benefit, and something you should absolutely be aware of, is that whether you take the 008 exam or whether you take the 009 exam, you get exactly the same certification. So the end game is the same. The only difference is the list of questions that they happen to ask of you. So that's the important part. That exam was, since it was released in June, it's going to be around probably for about 3 more years. So if you are studying for the N10-009, you have plenty of time. You don't have to worry about it being retired or disappearing anytime soon. So that at least is the one that you should be focusing on if you will not be taking your exam before December the 20th. So you need to think about that one. The exam, the 009 exam, exactly the same format as the 008, 90 minutes in length, maximum of 90 questions. You still need to earn a 720 on the same scale from 100 to 900. And it has the same type of exam questions, multiple choice-based questions and performance-based questions. So you have this choice to make right now, whether you take the N10-008 exam or the 009. It's probably going to be based on the study materials that you currently have. One thing that is important so that you are aware, You need to make sure that all of your study materials match the version of the exam that you will be taking. And if you would like to know more about what's different between these two exams, we can go through an overview of that in the Aftershow. And that's something that you can do right now. You can always visit professormesser.com/QA in your Vevox front end, and you can select the tab at the top and submit questions at any time that we will be looking through and picking out in the Aftershow. So feel free to do that. We will talk more about those two versions in that second hour, so stick around for that. I have not only exam materials for the 008, we have a full set of exam materials for the 009 on our website. Our course is absolutely free for you to watch online at YouTube. There's no back-end process. There's no registration. We don't hide anything behind a paywall. Everything is out there. You're able to earn your certification by watching those videos and taking the exam. And of course, we have other study materials you might want to consider. For example, our course notes. We have other downloadable products on our website. You can find all of that at professormesser.com/netsuccess. We have this replay of this live stream available on YouTube immediately after we're done. I also make an audio-only podcast version. So if you have a podcast program that you use, or you like to use a streaming audio service like Spotify, for example, you can find all of those on our website at professormesser.com/podcast, or simply look for it in your favorite podcast listening application. This will be something I add. Usually it's the after the show is over, or the next day, I get those audio files edited and posted online. So that's what we will be talking about in the podcast. Now, I mentioned the video replay of this is also available on YouTube. About a day after we post it, there is a list of timestamps that appear almost like magic. It's not really magic. It's my marketing manager, Lori. She's watching this replay. Hi, Lori. She's going through and listening to everything we're doing, and she's putting those timestamps in. So you know that all of the timestamps on here will be accurate because we had someone who's physically watching this and able to put those timestamps in. Nothing works as well as listening and typing it in yourself. And this is a very powerful tool that you can go back over years of these study groups and find exactly what you are looking for. When we're done with this study group, I'll be over on our Discord along with thousands of other people that are studying for their A+, Network Plus, Security Plus, and other certifications. We have a number of folks who just like to hang out anyway, even if they're not studying for a certification. They're all here to help, and that's usually where I'm hanging out after we're done. You can find it at professormesser.com/Discord. Not only can you join people that are also studying, you can create your own study groups on that Discord. You can invite people into the room. You can manage who gets to be in the room. You can share information on the screen and other people can see it. You can talk about exam topics. There's a lot of things that you can do. We try to make it a place where everybody can learn. We'd love for you to join us. You can find that at professormesser.com/Discord, or simply use the Discord icon in the upper right of the Professor Messer website. I also want to eventually let you know that eventually you will want to take the exam. Now, there is a cost to take the Network Plus exam. So if you would like to go to the CompTIA website and pay full price, you can certainly do that. But why would you do that when I have discounted vouchers available on my website? You can find those at professormesser.com/vouchers. You do need to be in the US, Canada, or US territory to be able to take advantage of those vouchers. But if you purchase them on my site, not only do you get the voucher from me, you get a copy of my Exam Hacks ebook. I don't sell this separately. It's a set of tips and tricks I put together for studying for your exam, and I give you tips that you can use during the exam itself that might give you a few extra points. And who doesn't want a few extra points on their exam? That is something included for free when you purchase the voucher from my site at the link you see here, professormesser.com/vouchers. Let's go back to that question we asked earlier, which was: a user's workstation has received an API-PA address. Which of the following would be the best next step to resolve this issue? Would it be add a gateway of last resort, enable STP on the user switch, add a static route to the user's workstation, decrease the DHCP lease time, or update the default DNS server? Let's see what you answered. We'll stop our poll and see what numbers come up. We did so much better this month than we did last month. Thank you everyone for answering this question. This was kind of a tough one because it was not a direct relationship between API-PA and lease times on a DHCP server. Anytime we see API-PA, we know we're not getting an IP address automatically. But one of the problems you have with an existing and working DHCP server is the server may be running, but it may just be out of IP addresses. That can sometimes happen. That address pool exhaustion will then cause everyone to not be able to receive an IP address from the DHCP server, and therefore it will automatically create its own private link local IP address. That automatic IP address assignment is the one that is the difficult thing to challenge. It's a challenge for network administrators because they have to now figure out why people are not able to communicate outside of their local subnet, which is of course a limitation of a link local address. So one of the ways that you can resolve that is to make the lease time a bit shorter so that you don't run out of IP addresses. Of all of the different options on here, that was the only one that would result in an API-PA address. Obviously, a gateway of last resort is an important thing to have, but it's not completely necessary to have an IP address assigned to your workstation. And by itself, not having one will not cause a system to have an API-PA address. Spanning tree protocol on a user switch will certainly stop loops from occurring, but it's not going to help you from an IP address perspective. Adding a static route, very similar to adding a gateway of last resort, changing the routing doesn't change the IP address assignment that you get on your computer. And updating the default DNS server, it may not even need an update. That isn't our problem. Our issue is not that we're not able to resolve an IP address from a fully qualified domain name. The problem is that we've been assigned an IP address that is only a link local address. We're not able to communicate outside of our local network, which means the only other option on here, and the one that must be correct, and indeed it is to decrease the DHCP lease time. That's the one you should have chosen. And indeed, we did a great job on this one. 59% of you got that one absolutely right. Well done. I have a new button on my screen. We can show a little bit differently this time. Look how many people answered that one. So nice job on decreasing the DHCP lease time. That is exactly the answer we were looking for. And hopefully that's one that you remember from last month, that we had a bit of a challenge trying to figure out if that really was the right answer. And I think we did a great job at remembering, and maybe we even learned something from what we did last month. Now let's do something a little bit different. And that's because I want to change the type of question that we're asking. I mentioned earlier that the Network Plus exam, along with A+, Security Plus, and other CompTIA exams, not only ask you questions in a multiple choice format, they also use a different kind of format, a performance-based question format. PBQ, sometimes we hear people talk about it. The question that we just had was a multiple choice question. There was a question and there were multiple options to choose from. And on this question, you may not have known the answer. You might have guessed. And I would bet the people that answered the correct answer, there may be folks within that 59% of you that didn't know, but you just guessed that one as maybe that one's right. And certainly that's great if you're looking for points on your exam, and who doesn't like a few extra points on their exam? But CompTIA wants to ask you some questions that can't be guessed at. You really do need to know the answer. And so these might be fill in the blank. It might be a drag and drop question. They may put you at a command prompt and ask you to perform some functions. You might have to put things in a particular order. Maybe you have to put things where they happen to go on your system. There's a lot of things that you need to consider with these performance-based questions. But the point with those is that none of them are multiple choice. So I have for you today a question that is a performance-based question. This one puts you at the command prompt and asks you to perform a number of different steps. This question asks, a Linux user is not able to connect to a remote web server with the FQDN of 1.1.1.1. That FQDN spelled out one.one.one.one. And now we have a Linux question to consider. We have three things that we would like to do. The first one is determine the IP address of the local device. We have to consider where we are with this local device. We then need to resolve the IP address of the web server. That's the one that's listed in our question. And lastly, I want you to document the routers used to communicate to the web server IP address. This one's going to be interesting because you may find the answers are not what you were expecting. We'll have to see if that's the case. And so those are the three things that I would like you to document. If you know what you would type in at the command prompt to perform that function, I would like you to add them to the server right here at professormesser.com/QA. Please do not put those into the chat room. Don't put those commands and send them in the chat room. You want to put them on that screen right there at professormesser.com/QA. This is one where we need to understand how to do things at a command prompt. And indeed, the processes that we are going through at this command prompt are processes that we would normally do during the troubleshooting process. So I want to see if you're able to do this. There's a few things that I threw in here that you have to know. As many of you know, on the exam, you have to know a number of Windows commands and a number of Linux commands. And a lot of the Linux commands can be used other places as well. This is a pretty good place to go if you were trying to figure out the details of command prompts in Windows and command prompts in Linux. You need to know a number of these. Now, fortunately, if I'm looking at these questions, I know that one of these is very Linux specific, but a couple of the others can work to some degree in other operating systems. That's not much of a hint, I realize. But at least I'm killing some good time here as you're typing in your answers. I'm going to take a little peek into your answers as well. Oh, a number of you are putting in some great things in here. We're obviously looking for 3 separate commands. So a number of you are submitting a single command, but we're looking for 3 separate commands. Some of you are spot on with some of these, by the way. And by the way, one of these that you see here, one of the bullets here, you can actually accomplish through a number of different ways, but only one method will really be the most accurate and the most informational. And that's what I'm looking for, is the most accurate and the most informational option. And even then, there's a couple of options you can choose from. This is all very cryptic as you're going through this. I'm sort of mentioning these hints and these tips, and we're not even talking about what we're doing yet. So that's what I would recommend for you, is to go through, submit your answers by visiting the link on your screen. Go to professormesser.com/QA, put your answer in, and let's see how you've done. How many people have submitted their answer on this one so far? Does it roll it up for me? By the way, I like the people that submit their answers that say, I have no idea. I don't know what you're talking about. Well, great. That's not great, but it's an opportunity. Let's look at it that way. Here's a chance for us to learn how to do these things from the very beginning. So let's step through all 3 of these bullets and see what I would type in. Let's see what you would type in, and let's see what the advantages and disadvantages might be of both of those. So we will start with the question again. It asks, a Linux user is not able to connect to a remote web server with the FQDN of one.one.one.one.one. It's 1.1.1.1 all spelled out. Now, some of you may already know that 1.1.1.1 is a very well-known service / DNS server / web server / VPN provided by Cloudflare. So this is a good one to use for testing. This is also a good one that we can test with when we look at this particular question. So the question again is asking about an FQDN. It's referring to a fully qualified domain name. We obviously don't have the IP address of this server, although I think we could probably determine what at least one of the IP addresses of this server might be based on the name. Let's see if we can step through the first question, which asks, determine the IP address of the local device. Well, if you're going to do that, you're probably going to want to use one of the different commands that's able to provide that information depending on what operating system you're using. So if you are on a Windows system, you would be using one command. If you are on a Linux or Mac OS system, it is a different command. And it may be a different command depending on the type of Linux distribution that you're using. So if you're on Windows, you would use the command ipconfig. Some of you may be very familiar with that one. But if you're at a Linux prompt and you type in ipconfig, it's not going to work. Linux has a slightly different command, which has a slightly different amount of output, called ifconfig. And in fact, the ifconfig command is exactly what I did on my screen up here. And when it outputted a lot of information about the interface on my system, the one that I gathered here is that the INET, or the internet IP address for this device, is 10.1.10.249, which happens to be the system that really is right in front of me right now. And it has a subnet mask written out in a hexadecimal format, which is a bit unusual, but that's how Linux does it. And it does give me also a broadcast address for this. In Linux, finding the IP address of the default gateway is a different set of commands. It doesn't show that information directly in the screen for ifconfig. Your Linux distribution could also use a different command for this, and this would be very useful. For example, IP is the command that you might have in your Linux distribution, and the full command is IP space address to be able to view that. So hopefully that gives you some perspective into the commands that you need to know. Obviously, this slide itself is one I pulled directly from the N10-009 exam. This is one that is in the section 5, the domain 5 for troubleshooting. So now we have been able to answer that first question. Let me go back to that previous slide. That first question of determining the IP address of the local device, we would use the ifconfig, or we would use IP address to be able to do that. The second thing that we need to do is to resolve the IP address of the web server. I think on the front end that I have here, it's determine the IP address of the web server, but I wanted to be a little bit more particular about resolving the IP address of the web server. There were a couple ways to do this. The best way, the way that you would be able to get the most accurate information, is the nslookup command or the dig command. These two utilities allow you to query the DNS server, so the domain name services server that contains all of this resolution information, and it's able to answer back as to what it believes the resolution is between the fully qualified domain name and the IP address. So I typed in my dig command here, which is dig and then a space and then the fully qualified domain name. And in this case, it's 1.1.1.1 to be able to do that. So you'll notice that a lot of information for dig comes out. It tells you what the dig parameters are. It gives you information on what it's doing. In this case, it's asking a question of that DNS server. Tell me what 1.1.1.1 is. one.one.one.one.one. And you can see the answer is right here. What's interesting about this is this DNS server, and in fact, it's probably the same on your DNS server, is that the name 1.1.1.1 actually resolves to two different IP addresses. One of the IP addresses is, not surprisingly, the numbers 1.1.1.1. They're a little cheeky how they put the 1 all spelled out as the fully qualified domain name. But notice we had a second IP address also show up on the DNS server, and it's 1.0.0.1. That's interesting that the name 1.1.1.1 could potentially resolve to an IP address that is not 1.1.1.1, but they put that in there for redundancy. If there is an issue with that first service, we have another IP address we could use as a backup, and that secondary IP address is 1.0.0.1. Now, neither of these IP addresses, if you're already thinking in your mind, maybe they have a CNAME, a canonical name, and a way to reference this in another way. They don't. Maybe they have a reverse DNS record that we could use to be able to reverse it out. We don't. All we have is that one-way resolution between the fully qualified domain name and the IP addresses. Now, some of you, for this answer, put ping space, and then the IP address of 1.1. or the name one.one.one.one.one. So that is technically a way that you could obtain one of the IP addresses for that fully qualified domain name. But if you use the ping command, you would have never found out that there was another IP address you could have chosen. And of course, we don't know what IP address the user was using because they were using the fully qualified domain name. What if their DNS resolution only came back with 1.0.0.1? You would be pinging the wrong IP address and potentially trying to troubleshoot something where no problem really exists. So ping in this case is half credit. I'll give you half credit for resolving that particular IP address because it does resolve one of these IP addresses, but it doesn't resolve both. It only gives you one of these. If you run a dig command or you run an NS lookup command, you will be able to see all of the IP addresses associated with that fully qualified domain name, which is a much more accurate way to perform this resolution. And the last question that is on our list is to document the routers used to communicate to the web server IP address. And that web server IP address could be either one of these, by the way. If you chose 1.1.1.1 or you chose 1.0.0.1, both of those are perfectly reasonable to use. And you would use the traceroute command to do that. My traceroute command, I use the second IP address. So this is a traceroute to 1.0.0.1. And you can see the trace route starts on my network. You can see I have a lot of local private IP addresses. There's a good bit of natting going on my internal network. I gotta work on that. I have a plan. So there's a lot of things happening there. We don't get out of my local IP address, my local ISP, until hop 7. So there's 6 different hops I'm going through before I'm even out of my local network for my ISP. And then we have a bunch of other IP addresses as it's making its way all the way down to the final address of 1.0.0.1, which you can see is resolved to 1.1.1.1. And you can see all of the settings for that one as well. So those were all 3 of the commands that hopefully you were able to use. We determined the IP address of the local device using, on my particular machine, we used ifconfig, but we could have used IP space address or IP space ADDR. We then determined the IP address of the web server. We resolved that IP address using dig or NS lookup. Either one of those would work. And then lastly, we documented all of the routers between us and that device by running a trace route command. And that trace route gave us a lot of detail about the information and the number of hops between my device here and that particular DNS server. In fact, that is my default DNS server, 1.1.1.1. So every time I perform a DNS lookup, it goes through 11 hops to get there and probably 11 hops to get back, or something like it. So that is a good example of how we might use some of these command lines in that domain 5, that troubleshooting section, to be able to troubleshoot, gather information, define configurations. There were a lot of ways that we can accomplish this, but only those series of commands were really the best ones, which would be our performance-based question of this particular month. Hopefully that gave you an idea. There are a lot of other command lines that you need to know, both Windows and Linux. Make sure you are familiar with them. That is something that can really be useful if you are sitting down in front of a machine and you're asked to troubleshoot. What if the machine's Mac OS? What if it's Linux? What if it's Windows? You need to know what to use in each individual situation. And don't be like me. Just type it in, sit down on a Linux machine and type dir and hit enter. It's not going to work. And you realize, oh, I'm on the wrong machine. You have to focus. You have to know what you're doing with that. That is our performance-based question of the month. Hopefully, we not only were able to get through that, a number of you answered the questions extremely well. And if you didn't know these, well, now you know 3 or 4 or 5 of the command lines that you need to know for your Network Plus exam. Let's now move back to a multiple choice question. This next question is one that asks, a network engineer would like to prevent client disassociation attacks. Which of the following would be the best option? Would it be to require HTTPS for all web communication, use a VPN to connect to remote sites, enable 802.1x on all switches, enable personal firewalls on all devices, or upgrade all access points to a newer standard. Those are your 5 options. If you think you know the answer, again, please no answers in the chat room. Instead, you want to plug in your answer using the link on your screen. Go to professormesser.com/QA to lock in your answer. See if you know what this one is. Number of viewers saying in the chat room, what if in that last question we used to ping instead of using dig? Would that work? Well, I think on your exam, you would probably get a more specific question than the very broad one. I intentionally kind of left that one a little bit broad so that we could talk about different options on here and why one would be better than the other. At one point, I had tightened it down so it could only be one answer, but I like the idea because we've done this a number of times now. I know that a number of you are going to type in something else. And I like the idea of talking about why we would or wouldn't use ping in any particular situation. And I think that was just a purpose. I did that one on purpose so that we could really talk through why is ping better in some situations than others. And I think we saw there with the multiple IP addresses that we got from dig, we can see why dig would be a more valuable and in this case, a more accurate command than ping happened to be. This kind of shifts back to more of a security question, though, and certainly there's a whole section of security on our Network Plus exam. Hopefully, you're familiar with this particular scenario. A number of you are typing in and getting your answers locked in right now and figuring out what you think the answer might be. This is one that hopefully you will not run into. I think this is one that I don't want to give too much away, but I will refrain from putting too many hints into the chat, into the live stream at the moment, and we'll figure out what the answer might be. Let's see how you did with this one. The question again asks, a network engineer would like to prevent client disassociation attacks. Which of the following would be the best option? Would it be to require HTTPS for all web communication, use a VPN to connect remote sites, enable 802.1x on all switches, enable personal firewalls on all devices, or upgrade all access points to a newer standard? Let's see what you answered. We'll close our poll, and we can see that we are all over the place. 34% of you said enable 802.1x on all switches. I guess 35%. We have 21% that said use a VPN to connect remote sites. 23% of you said upgrade all access points to a newer standard. 13% said enable personal firewalls on all devices. And 9% say require HTTPS for all web communication. So our question here was about client disassociation. This is a denial of service attack. This is a way that someone could put traffic on your network that would prevent someone else from accessing that wireless technology. Not just the wireless network or a server on the network or be able to ping on the network. It completely knocks you off of the wireless network. It disassociates you from being able to connect. So we have that list of addresses, or we have the list of access points that we can see when we pull that down. And we can see that there might be 60 access points in this big list. We want that guest access point. And you're working along and suddenly you're not working anymore. It just drops right off. Or you're not able to connect to the wireless network. And you're wondering, why am I not able to connect to this network? Well, that's because someone else on this wireless network is sending out a specially built frame to disassociate you from that network. They're effectively booting you off the network, even though they don't have the authority to do so. They're taking advantage of a security vulnerability within that particular version of the wireless. It's all about the wireless standard. I was going to say the wireless version, but it's really the standard of the wireless configuration that you are using. You can, if you were to capture the frames going over the wireless network, because it's in the air around us, you could capture these disassociation frames. And in the video, I show you a demonstration of this occurring. You can see the machine drop right off the network when you start sending these frames out. It happens immediately. There's no delays at all. This is not something you have to work up into or be in the right scenario. You can simply hit one button and someone instantly leaves the network. One of the best ways to prevent this from happening is to use an access point that does not pay attention to these non-authorized frames, that it is able to take that specific kind of management frame and add additional security to it. But to be able to do that, we have to use a newer standard, an updated standard for the wireless network. You are effectively at that point physically replacing your access point. So you're going from 802.11n to 802.11ax, for example. You're upgrading it to Wi-Fi 6, to Wi-Fi 7, or Wi-Fi, whatever it happens to be. And that is a very good example of how that works. This is exactly the scenario we find ourselves in here because we have suffered this client disassociation attack. Let's look through these and see which one of these would have really done it. So 35% of you said to enable 802.1x. This is an authentication method so that you have to put in your username and password to gain access to the network. But if someone is disassociating you from the wireless network, you can't even connect to the wireless network. You're never going to be able to get to the point where you can type in a username and password. That's no good. So that is a very good example of how one type of technology isn't going to stop a different technology from taking place if that one knocks you off the network first. So 802.1x, although you should have that configured, it's a very good way to add additional security to your network. If you can't get on the wireless network, you can't use 802.1x. 21% of you said use a VPN. That's one way. It's all encrypted. Doesn't help you. Again, if you can't get on the network, you can't connect to the VPN. So using a VPN is not going to help you. And by the way, the disassociation attack, if you were already connected over a VPN, it's just going to drop you off the network anyway. Doesn't help you. VPNs do not prevent this particular kind of attack from occurring. Along the same line, since we're here, requiring HTTPS is also a way to encrypt information within the traffic flow. And although it will prevent somebody from seeing the traffic as it's going across your wireless network, doesn't stop anyone from performing a disassociation attack. That's not going to help you anymore. We also have enabling personal firewalls on all devices. Personal firewalls are great security tools. It allows you to prevent or allow certain kinds of traffic to be sent or received to your computer. And if you have a laptop or mobile device and you go to a trade show, you go to a hotel, you go to a coffee shop, you're on a train, you might want to make sure that your personal firewall is enabled. However, that is only going to help you if you're on the network. And if somebody's performing a disassociation attack, you're not on the network, your firewall isn't going to be used for anything at that point. The only one we didn't mention here, and the one that is the right response, is the one that 23% of you chose, which is to upgrade all access points to a newer standard. That is the answer that we were looking for. Unfortunately, it was not the one that most of you chose, but now we understand client disassociation attacks. Now we understand how they operate. And hopefully in the future, if you see any mention of a client disassociation attack, now we understand what we can do to help prevent that from occurring in the future. Hopefully a lot of you are already using newer access points. And if you're running any of the Wi-Fi 6 or Wi-Fi 7, we were updated so this problem doesn't occur a long time ago. So simply updating to a newer version can often resolve not just issues with bandwidth and performance and spectrum usage, but in some cases also prevents certain types of security problems. Hopefully that's something we can now keep in mind as we're going through and thinking about other questions. Speaking of other questions, here's another multiple choice question for you. This one asks, a network team has configured dual stack routing on their core routers. Which of the following would be the most likely reason for this configuration? Is it to simultaneously support both IPv4 and IPv6? Is it connectivity to redundant routers? Is it load balancing across two core routers? Is it a failover path if one router fails? Or is it the implementation of two dynamic routing protocols? Hopefully you're familiar with this. The question again asks, a network team has configured dual stack routing on their core routers. Which of the following would be the most likely reason for this configuration? Is it simultaneous support for both IPv4 and IPv6, connectivity to redundant routers, load balancing across two core routers, failover path if one router fails, or implementation of two dynamic routing protocols? If you think you know the answer, go to the professormesser.com/QA link that you see on your screen, and you can answer that question. We'll see how you do. Oh boy, this is going to be a good one to be able to figure out what these are. Yeah, once you lock in your answer, some folks are saying, I locked in my answer, now I can't unlock my answer. That is a bit of a challenge with this. Happens to be the way the software works on the screen. That's okay. Fortunately, this is not your exam. So in your mind, just pretend you clicked on the other one and give yourself full credit. If it's the right answer, we'll give ourselves full credit. Maybe we decide on another answer. What if it's the wrong answer? Now we don't know. Now we'll have to figure that out as we go through. Isn't there a clear button? Isn't there a button we can undo? There used to be. I thought there was. Maybe there is. People are saying it's on the bottom left. I'm on the bottom left. So maybe you have something else in your bottom left that you could pull that from. A lot of you have answered this one. Hopefully we know the answer to this one. Let's see how we do. The question asks, a network team has configured dual stack routing on their core routers. Which of the following would be the most likely reason for this configuration? Is it simultaneous support for both IPv4 and IPv6, connectivity to redundant routers, load balancing across two core routers, failover path if one router fails, or implementation of two dynamic routing protocols? We'll close our poll and see how we did. We did not get a majority, but we did get a good number of you that answered. 40% of you answered simultaneous support for both IPv4 and IPv6. But 22% of you said load balancing across two core routers. 21% said a failover path if one router fails. And then we have single digits. 8% said connectivity to redundant routers, and implementation of two dynamic routing protocols only got 6%. Now, if we go with the plurality of you that say simultaneous support for both IPv4 and IPv6, that is indeed what dual stack routing allows you. The dual stacks are referring to a protocol stack. In this case, it would be IPv4 and IPv6. That is really the two stacks. I guess technically you could be running different stacks. What if you were running IPv4 and IPX? You would first be 20 years ago, and then you would be finally putting IPv4 in your network. But in this case, whenever you see dual stack these days, we are almost always 100% of the time choosing IPv4 and IPv6. Those are the two addresses. Now, the reason you'd put both of those on the network is that maybe you are already running IPv4. Most people are. But one of the challenges is, what if you begin to implement IPv6 on your network? Because there might be a good reason to do that. There probably is a good reason to do that. But one of the things that you're able to do is now have both of those protocols routed through the same router. Your router, of course, needs to support both IPv4 and IPv6. But now we know we have both of those protocols running simultaneously on the core router. Obviously, there is some engineering you have to do before simply enabling this. Don't simply turn this on your core router. You need to determine how much memory this is going to take, what impact it will have on the performance of the router. Are there any routing protocols we need to keep in mind? Will the multicast associated with this cause any issues? There's a lot of questions about deploying this, but most of the questions are relatively straightforward. They're easy to work through. They're easy to evaluate. The routers will give you plenty of information and statistics on how the router is performing. But this might be a good test to be able to have both IPv4 devices and IPv6 devices all working at the same time simultaneously through the same network using the same routers, because you have enabled dual stack routing. And indeed, that is the answer we were looking for. 40% of you said simultaneous support for both IPv4 and IPv6. That's why you would configure dual stack routing. 22% said load balancing across the two core routers. Enabling dual stack doesn't somehow help you with load balancing. You can load balance with a single stack. Most people have load balancing, shouldn't say most, but many people have load balancing already configured with networks that are simply running IPv4, for example. So that is something that can be done without having to do any type of dual stack on your routers. Having a failover path if one router fails, that's always a good idea, but that's not referring to dual stack. That's simply either a standby router, something we call an active-passive configuration. Some routing protocols allow you to have an active-active configuration. OSPF has a parameter for that. BGP has some configurations for that. But you don't need to run dual stack in order to have a failover path. So that would not be the most likely reason given these 5 options. We have connectivity to redundant routers. Again, redundancy with our routers doesn't require dual stack. That's something you can do with a single stack. And the implementation of 2 dynamic routing protocols, that's something that's not unheard of. You may have a link that is receiving information with 2 separate dynamic routing protocols. The way it's commonly implemented is you have one type of dynamic routing protocol on one side of the router and a completely different dynamic routing protocol on the other side of the router. For example, you might have BGP coming into one interface of the router and OSPF on your internal network, or EIGRP or RIP version 2, again, if your router is 20 years old. So those are very common to have this. And in fact, you would do some type of route redistribution as the routes are being compiled inside of this router with dynamic routing protocols, but you don't need to have dual stacks to be able to do that. In this case, the best answer, the one that is the most likely reason and the one that makes the most sense, is indeed supporting 2 separate stacks, 2 separate protocols, which in this case would be IP version 4 and IP version 6. Wow, I've been talking quite a bit on this one so far. We've been going through a lot of different topics, and we've had to go through a number of different ones. And that's because Network Plus is not just a single topic. Network Plus contains so many different topics. It is a big exam with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different exam objectives. So it's useful if you're able to watch every single video that I have. I have 87 N10-009 videos on my YouTube channel. There's over 12 hours of training content there, but you may find that you just don't have time to watch all of them, or maybe you had to skip a few of them. Maybe you feel like you knew that content, but it might be useful to have some way to go back and refer to all of the information that was in these videos. So I took all of my video content and I put it into a series of course notes. These course notes provide all of the text, all of the charts, all of the diagrams, all of the important information that you need to be able to understand everything that was in those videos. And because I make the videos based on the CompTIA exam objectives, everything in these course notes matches the objectives exactly. In fact, if you look at the numbering scheme of these, in fact, section 1.4 for network communication correlates back to section 1.4 of the official exam objectives. So you can find exactly what you are looking for by looking through these course notes. If this is something that you might want to have as you're going through the videos, or something you'd like to reference after you've watched the video course, this might be something you might want to purchase. You can find out more about it at professormesser.com/NPCN. That's for our Network Plus course notes. See what I did there? We're getting short of time, so let's go through another question that we have here. This next question asks, which of the following would you most likely find in an IDF? Which of the following would you most likely find in an IDF? Would that be a workgroup switch, a cloud service, a core router, a WAN DMARC, or an internet firewall? Is it a gimme? I don't know. Sometimes I think a question is a gimme, and sometimes it doesn't work out that way. But maybe you are familiar with this topic. Which of the following would you most likely find in an IDF? Is it a workgroup switch, a cloud service, a core router, a WAN DMARC, or an internet firewall? If you think you know the answer, go to professormesser.com/QA and lock in your answer. See how you do with this one. I'll also remind you that at the end of this hour, in just a few minutes, we'll be moving into the after show portion of the live stream. I will be taking your questions. You can submit those questions at any time. You don't have to wait for the after show to start. It's just at the top of your Vevox front end. If you visit professormesser.com/QA, not only can you answer questions, you can also ask questions by hitting that tab that's right at the top of the screen. So you're welcome to submit those questions at any time during this live stream, anytime in the first hour, and I'll be looking through those questions in the second hour of the live stream. So let's see how you did with this one. The question asks, which of the following would you most likely find in an IDF? Is it a workgroup switch, cloud service, core router, WAN DMARC, or internet firewall? We have a number of you that answered. We have 40% of you that answered workgroup switch. 2% said cloud service. 22% of you said WAN DMARC. 19% internet firewall. And 15% of you said core router. That's a pretty good difference between all of these. Obviously, the one that came in as the winner was that 40% that said workgroup switch. I guess it would be useful to know, though, what am I talking about when I say an IDF? An IDF is an intermediate distribution frame. This is one of those acronyms, by the way, that doesn't tell you a thing about it, even if you know what the words are. This is one of the reasons I tell you, don't spend a lot of time just memorizing acronym and words. Sometimes it helps you, sometimes it doesn't. An intermediate distribution frame doesn't help you a bit. What this really means is that this is the closet that is up on the floor where all the users happen to be. This is an odd name. It goes back to the world of mainframes, where the main distribution frame, or the MDF, is effectively your data center. That is the main part of your facility. And a very common architecture in many buildings is to have one MDF, maybe that's in the basement or it's in a core part of the building. And then on each floor of the building is a separate closet. Usually it is just a closet where you have all of the workgroup switches. In fact, the closet looks a lot like the picture I have here with all the wires and all of the craziness. And it's usually one rack or half a rack. Not much is there because there's not a lot to plug in there. It's a closet. It's usually locked up. Nobody can get in there. And we're really just connecting all of our users and printers to it. And we have connections from here, probably through these fiber connectors on the switches that run down to the MDF, which is how we work through this. My IDF and MDF that I have set up is not this crazy. This is not mine. That's a stock photo. Mine is much cleaner than this. Well, maybe not a lot cleaner, but it's cleaner than this particular configuration. So if you are looking at an IDF, it's on the floor of your building. You probably walked by it. You probably can hear in that closet. Why is there a lot of fans running in that closet? That's a very loud closet and it's locked. I can't get in there. Well, that's because it's supposed to be. You should not gain access to those to be able to work through it. So hopefully you're already familiar with what an IDF is, and you know between all the things that were listed here, we wouldn't put our internet firewall in a closet that's on a floor somewhere. That doesn't make sense. That's probably in your MDF. The WAN demarcation point, this is where all of your WAN connections come in. That's probably not going to be on the floor of a building. That's going to also be in your main distribution frame. So that's not going to be in an IDF. Your core router, definitely not in an IDF. That's also in your MDF, or the core of your network. And a cloud service is usually not even in your building. It's usually somewhere else. So that's certainly not going to be in an IDF. That leaves us with one option, which in this case is really the best option. We probably have a workgroup switch in there, a 24-port, a 48-port switch, or numerous 24 or 48-port switches that connect all of our users. And then we have single fibers that go down to the main data center or the main distribution frame, MDF. So in this case, finding a workgroup switch was exactly what we were looking for. That is what we would most likely find in an IDF given these 5 different options. And 40% of you got that one absolutely correct. If you're watching this video for continuing education unit credit, I would love to give you an email that certifies that you were here for this 1 hour of a webinar category CEU. That's a continuing education unit. Now, if you're not certified, this has nothing to do with you. But for those of you that already have a certification, either a CompTIA or even a third party, or you are expected to gather continuing education units for things that you're doing at work or elsewhere, I would love to send you an email, but you have to follow these directions. At the top or the bottom of the Professor Messer website, click the Contact Us link. In that Contact Us link, put your name, your email address. In the subject line, please put December 2024 Network Plus. Helps me know where this came from. And then in the body of the message, on a line by itself, please put the super secret code words of the month, which are core router workgroup switch. Those are our super secret code words of the month. And then it takes me about a week or so to turn these around, sometimes a little faster. I think it will be a little faster this week. And then I'll send you an email that is digitally signed by me that says that you have earned 1 hour of a webinar category CEU. Obviously, you can't simply watch all of my videos to be able to renew your certification. You have to do more than simply watch videos. You have to perform multiple tasks, but maybe this will help you as you move towards that. If you're someone who is collecting CEUs to renew, you may not be collecting CEUs to renew. You may be doing something else, but if you need CEUs, I can get you some of those. Again, the process you want to follow is to go to the top or the bottom of the Professor Messer website, click Contact Us, put in your name, your email address. In the subject line, please put December 2024 Network Plus. And in the body of the message on a line by itself, put the super secret code words of the month, which are core router workgroup switch. You can also put anything else you'd like in there. I do read through every single one of these. So thank you so much for sending those in. I do like reading your stories. I get hundreds of these every month. So I'm not able to respond individually to all of them, but it's such great reading. I like to hear where you are in the process, what you've already certified in, what you're working on next. It is something that helps motivate me quite a bit. So thank you for including those if you happen to do that in the CEU, but you don't have to. Just simply put core router workgroup switch, send it in. I know what you're looking for. I'll be able to get it to you. Not a problem at all. Simple to do. Now, I know we're at the top of the hour. Let's fit in one more question because I mentioned I've been talking a lot. So let's see if we can fit in one more question into this mix before we go to your questions. This question asks, a company would like one of their printers to always use the same IP address. Which of the following would provide this functionality? Would it be static routing, 802.1x, SSID broadcast suppression, WPA3, or DHCP reservation? You think you know the answer? Follow the link on your screen. Go to professormesser.com/QA and lock in your answer. A company would like one of their printers to always use the same IP address. Which of the following would provide this functionality? Would it be static routing, 802.1x, SSID broadcast suppression, WPA3, or DHCP reservation? If you think you know the answer, lock that answer in. A lot of people locking their answers in on this one. We'll have to see how you do with this one. You've probably even been in this situation where you have a printer or some other device and you always want it to have the same IP address. There's a number of ways to do that, but only one of them is in this list. Let's see how you do with this. A lot of you are locking these in to see what the answers are. This is one whenever we're working through these questions, I'm building these questions prior to the study group. I'm always reading through them and thinking, how would I answer this one? How would I approach this problem? How would I focus on this issue? And this question has a number of different configurations that you could use. There's a number of different ways to solve this particular problem. So I like questions like that. But then as I'm reading through the answers, the thing that I'm thinking I would do is not necessarily what's listed on the screen. That, by the way, is not uncommon on the exam. You will very often get a question like this, and it says, which of the following would be the best response? Which of the following would be the first thing that you would do? And you really have to choose through that list to know what this is. Let's see how you did with this one. Again, the question asks, a company would like one of their printers to always use the same IP address. Which of the following would provide this functionality? Is it static routing, 802.1x, SSID broadcast suppression, WPA3, or DHCP reservation? How do we do? 63% of a majority of you say the answer is DHCP reservation, but 37% of you, a very strong second place, say the answer is static routing. And then look at these numbers, 0% for 802.1x, 0% for SSID broadcast suppression, and 0% for WPA3. This is a pretty interesting one because normally we get at least some answers, then maybe one of them doesn't turn out to get any answers. But in this case, 3 of these got no answers at all. This is pretty interesting. And we have 2 that we were choosing from, DHCP reservation and static routing. Well, in this particular case, we're going to go with the majority because it is indeed the address reservation that we were looking for. This matches a MAC address inside of the DHCP server with a predefined IP address and locks it in so that you will always get that IP address on that particular device. Now, for those of you that have done this before, you probably went, I'm talking about myself, you probably went to the printer and you manually typed in the IP address you wanted it to use. Isn't that effectively the same thing? Well, it is effectively the same thing. That's exactly the same thing in the way that it operates. So if you went to the printer and you manually typed in, usually you have to use like an up-down arrow, and you manually put in the IP address, a static IP address configuration, we refer to that. That means that that particular printer, if you were to power it down and power it back up, it would remember and always use that IP address. So why wouldn't you do that? Why would you use an address reservation in a DHCP server? Well, that's because on a DHCP server, you can change this from one central place. You probably don't have one printer at your office. You probably have 100 printers. And let's say that we're now deciding to put all of the printers on their own VLAN. Finally, we've gotten approval to move all the printers off the big network and move them onto the separate VLAN. Well, that means they are all going to need a new IP address. Yeah, but you've been doing static addressing on the printers, which means you have to physically go and visit 100 printers to move them to the right VLAN so that all the printers will be working on Monday morning. You have a very long weekend ahead of you. Or you were smart and you created a DHCP reservation, which means you can log into the DHCP server, just quickly change all the IP addresses for the printers, click, 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 click. Click, hit apply, and you're done. No long weekends, no visiting the printer, no hitting the up and down arrows and trying to configure the IP address that way. No going to even a separate management application for the printer to try to do it online. You don't have to do any of that. Because you used address reservation, you simply go into the record for that particular IP address and that particular device that has that particular MAC address, and you edit and you change it right there. That is the best way to implement an IP address that will not change constantly, or that needs to stay in one place, but you need to change it later. It is an address that does not change, but you may have to change it someday. And not applying a static address on that device is great. Well, in this case, we don't have to talk about 802.1x, which would be authenticating to the network with the username and password and perhaps other authentication factors. That's not what we were trying to do. That has nothing to do with IP addresses that we would receive. SSID broadcast suppression means that we are disabling that wireless network from appearing in a list of available wireless networks. That's not what we were trying to do. WPA3 is obviously the encryption and security methods used on the most modern wireless access points. Again, has nothing to do with locking in a particular IP address. And then static routing, although it has the word static in the name, which tends to make us believe it's something that doesn't change. Well, that's true. It's a route that doesn't change. This is something you configure inside of a router so that traffic inbound to the router will always go to a particular route. That's what a static route does. A static route does not lock in a particular IP address for a device such as a printer so that it always receives that IP address when it starts up. So just because you see the word static doesn't mean that it means always has the same IP address. In this case, it always has the same route, which is different than always having the same IP address. The thing that we were looking for, the answer, in fact, the only answer here that provides the functionality we need of having the same IP address on this printer is indeed the DHCP reservation. That is the answer we were looking for. That is the one that gives you everything you need to be able to answer that question. Hopefully that's given you an idea of different options available on this particular network. And if you're managing a network with a lot of printers and a lot of IP addresses that don't need to change, and you don't want to do static addressing, this is the right answer for you. It's probably the best way to do it on most networks. That's what we were looking for. The answer again, DHCP reservation, and 63% of you got that one absolutely correct. As we were going through some of these questions today, a number of you were saying, where did that topic come from? I don't remember seeing that in the videos. Where's that one from again? Well, you probably noticed on the answer pages for each of these, I had numbers that were associated with the domain and section from the official CompTIA exam objectives. These objectives are absolutely free. You can download them right now from the CompTIA website by visiting professormesser.com/objectives, or you can simply go to your favorite search engine and type in CompTIA exam objectives. It'll take you to the same place. It'll probably be the first link that you find to be able to have that there. That is a very good place to go, because someone was mentioning a question. I'll just take a question right now from earlier where somebody said, I'm ready to take my exam. How do I know that I'm ready? How do I really qualify that I'm ready to take this exam? Well, the exam objectives have every possible option on here. All of the bullets that you need to know, all of the topics that could possibly be asked of you are in the exam objectives. They are extensive. They tell you everything. For example, in section 5.5, you'll notice that given a scenario, use the appropriate tool or protocol to solve networking issues. And in fact, you can see here we have some different options for a ping, a trace route, a dig, and if config. These are command lines we saw earlier. So some of you that are wondering, where did that command line come from? Where did that command get listed? It's in section 5.5 under software tools. And there is a video in my series in section 5.5 that is for software command line tools. So that would be a great one to go to. It's listed right here in the exam objectives. Another thing that's useful, if you keep scrolling in the exam objectives, there's an entire acronym list in the back. So if you're trying to take those terms and figure out what is that, you can certainly find it in here. For example, MDF means main distribution frame. There it is. That solves everything. I'm glad I memorized that, because the words main distribution frame certainly tell me everything that I need to know about that particular topic. Doesn't help me at all. Does not help me one bit. So this is a good place to go. Most of these can't help you though. For example, if you find a question that talks about IAM, that's identity and access management. That might give you the information you need to answer a question, but they are all in. This entire acronym list is in the back of the N10-009, well, and also the N10-008 official exam objectives from CompTIA. And of course, you can get them at professormesser.com/objectives. I have a link that will take you right over there. Well, we do these study groups for Network Plus once a month. This is our last one for 2024, but we're already planning our study group for 2025. If you enjoyed watching this one, we'd love for you to come back for the live stream that we have currently scheduled on January the 15th. We, of course, have our A+ study groups on January the 7th and 9th, Network Plus on the 15th. And although we do have a January study group for Security Plus currently scheduled for January 22nd, we also have a Security Plus study group Thursday. We're here recording this live on a Tuesday. So 2 days from today, for those of you that are here live, can also come back and join us for our last Security Plus study group of the month and of the year. And it's our last study group at all of the year. So that might be a fun one to visit. Of course, we're going to have all new questions for that one as well. These dates can sometimes change, so make sure you keep checking in. We always keep our calendars up to date. So if any of these change, I update that link immediately at professormesser.com/calendar. Also, keep the list updated in our Discord. There's an events channel in the Discord that also lists all of these. So you can always find when the next event is going to be. Even if you're watching this video months down the line, you can always go to professormesser.com/calendar. Well, we're not done. Although our first hour is over, I have more questions to answer that you provide to me in our after show. Stick around for that. Don't forget about our Network Plus course success bundle. You can find that at professormesser.com/netsuccess. If you do need a discounted voucher, I've got them on my site. Why pay full price when you can get it directly at professormesser.com/vouchers? And of course, we're on the social media. We're hip and trendy. We've got our questions out there. There might be also some more videos coming very soon, so you might want to consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. And if you like this video, I would love for you to give it a thumbs up. That helps us quite a bit over on the YouTube side. And it's something you can do absolutely free, and it really does help us quite a bit. So thank you so much for your support there as well. Stick around for the after show. I have your questions coming up next. We'll talk about whatever you'd like to talk about. Well, almost everything you might want to talk about. We'll certainly go through those and answer the questions you have. Stick around, and thanks for joining us in this first hour on our Network Plus study group. Thanks, everybody. Okay. Let's take a sip. Let's bring us back up on camera one. And let's see if we can step through the after show. Thank you so much for joining us in that first hour. It's always fun to have the study group and be able to go through those questions. You know, sometimes I write these questions and think, well, that one's going to be a gimme. Nobody is going to be able to get that one wrong. And then it goes a completely different direction when we're live. So I'm the worst person to ask to figure out the details of this. Now, fortunately, we're in the part of the show where you can ask questions of me. So I guess some of that pressure is off of me. If you would like to submit a question for that second hour, let me put me in there. You can do that at any time by simply visiting that same link that we have been talking about, professormesser.com/QA. That is a great place to go to answer that question. Submit those questions at any time. I will be going through this list on my side. It doesn't just jump out at you when you find that in the list. You can submit that online by going to professormesser.com/QA. That's a great place to go to figure out the details. So I think that might help you as you're going through this. Thank you, Taz, for the trolling in the chat room of my lovely green screen that I have back here. That is the ongoing bit for what we have here. And I appreciate you doing that. That made me laugh just a little bit. Let me start going through the questions, but only a little bit. Let me start going through the questions that we have that you have submitted already. You can certainly submit those at any time using the link on your screen. Go to professormesser.com/QA. Let's go through networking questions. We got lots of networking questions that came through. This is an interesting one. Since OSI model is part of the Network Plus exam, we certainly have to understand the 7 layers. And when you're talking with other technologists, having that OSI language is one that you can communicate and have the same language, even though you might even be talking about different products. Well, you might know Cisco routers. Somebody else might know a different brand of routers. Maybe one person uses a Checkpoint firewall. Somebody else uses a Palo Alto Networks firewall. But you can still communicate across both of those by referencing that OSI model. The question we have from Josh asks, we know that we have a layer 2 switch. That's how switches operate, is at layer 2, or that MAC address layer of the OSI model. We have marketing people that have named a layer 3 switch, even though it's not switching at layer 3. we still call it a layer 3 switch. It's a different problem with a different answer. But the question that Josh has is, have you ever heard of a layer 7 switch? Well, there is content switching. There is such a thing. If you want to, we don't really call it a layer 7 switch because having a layer 3 switch was confusing enough. Calling it a layer 7 switch, I guess there wasn't enough marketing juice in there to be able to call it a layer 7 switch. But content switching is not unheard of. That is a real thing. We often refer to this type of, it's not even really switching, it's really content forwarding, but we often refer to it as content switching. It's often done in things like a load balancer, where traffic is inbound to a load balancer. And there might be on your website, if you ever look at a website URL, there's some URLs that have one page, and within that page, you've embedded other URLs. So there might be a 1/2/3/4 levels that you're going through. So you might have a load balancer set up where if anybody is going to this set of pages, they go over to that server. If somebody's going to a different set of pages, they go over to that server. So it's effectively looking at the content and switching it to a different machine depending on the URL that someone is visiting. We could also expand this out to even consider firewalls. Obviously, the firewalls that we use today are next generation firewalls, which I guess now are current generation firewalls. We're going to have to come up with better names for our firewalls, I guess. But most firewalls these days operate at layer 7. They are able to look at the traffic flows, determine what application that traffic flow is actually part of, and then determine whether that traffic is allowed or disallowed based on the application that is in use. So that's different than simply using a port number. With port numbers, you could spoof a port number. You can use a different port number. Let's say you wanted to allow port 80 and port 443. But what if I changed my web server to a different port number? That wouldn't work. Or what if I changed my file transfer server to port 80? That would allow it through the port-based firewall. Firewalls that operate at layer 4 don't provide really much security at all. That's why we created next generation firewalls that operate at layer 7. So they can see, even though this traffic is using port 80, that's not web traffic. That's file transfer traffic. That's FTP traffic. I'm going to deny that because I have a rule in my firewall that says all FTP traffic is denied. Wait, it's using port 80. Yeah, but it's not port 80. It's not web server traffic, which is allowed. And if I do happen to see web server traffic coming through the network on port 1234, I will allow that traffic because I have a rule that says allow web traffic. Now, of course, with these next-gen firewalls, you can also combine these different parameters together. So only allow traffic if it's port 80 and port 443, and then only allow it if it also happens to match web server traffic. So you can really start stacking those parameters one on top of the other to make an even more secure device. So layer 7 does come into play, not at a switching level, not at a networking device level, which was really what Josh was asking about, but content switching is certainly a thing. And of course, devices operating at layer 7 at the network device level are also a thing as well. You can find those and be able to work through them. It is a very common thing to find on especially very large networks. We don't tend to have that equipment on our home network, but not unusual to find in an enterprise. And if you're in a relatively large company, you're probably doing something like that today. Let's have a look at more questions you might have on this list. This is one that is more about the exam itself and how the exam works. And it's worth sort of mentioning this. This is from Ben, who asks, if I'm on a performance-based question and I entered a different command that would do exactly the same thing as the one that they wanted, would that pass, fail, or give me partial credit? So I sort of touched on this earlier with the question that I posed as my performance-based question earlier, because there were certain commands that you could have used that could have been different. For example, on the second question where we had to resolve an IP address from a fully qualified domain name, you had two good commands you could have used to do that. The dig command and the NSLOOKUP command. Both of those would have given you the same level of detail in the answer. They would have been perfectly reasonable responses. They would have been perfectly correct responses. Now, on your exam, what if you did get a question? And for some reason, what you'll find in your exam most of the time is there's not this level of ambiguity. They are very specific on the exam, and there's really only one choice you would choose. But let's say they didn't do that. Let's say on the exam that you had a question like that and you could use dig or you could use NSLOOKUP. Well, that should give you full credit for both of those, I would think. There wouldn't be a case. Now, the problem we have with this particular question, Ben, is that we don't know the answer. CompTIA doesn't tell us how they grade the exam. They will never tell us how they grade the exam. At least I don't think they ever will. I think they will always leave this with, that's probably the only ambiguous part of the exam, is how'd they come up with that final score? We don't know. What we do know of the exam is that you have to reach a certain number. Not all industry exams are like that, by the way. If you look at a Cisco exam, when you start the Cisco exam presents you with a number of different questions, and the questions may change as you go through it. It is an exam that is adaptive, which means the answer that you give affects the question that you get next on the exam. That also means you can't go back. Once you answer a question, you've locked it in, and that's it. You can only go forward. Thankfully, CompTIA doesn't do that. But that means at the end of the Cisco exam, you have a passing score that you hopefully were able to reach. But your passing score is different than someone else who takes the exam at the same time, because they're going to get a different set of questions. And the questions they get will change depending on what their answers are. So they end up getting a different passing score on their exam. It is so complicated. I don't know why they do that. Well, I do know why they do that, but it makes it more complicated for us to figure out on the back end of this. CompTIA exams have a very specific range that you're looking for. They give you the exact number that you are going to earn. But the complicated part about the CompTIA exam is that the grading of the exam is completely hidden. We don't know how many questions how many points each question is worth. So we're not quite sure if we get a question right or we get a question wrong. Does that affect us? Do we get more points? Do we get fewer points? Is that question worth more? Is that question worth less? How is it calculated? You'll never know. They know how the calculations work behind the scenes, but that is a bit of a challenge. We at least have the ability on the CompTIA exams to jump around to different questions. So you at least have that option available to you. And once you get through the entire exam, you could go back and to any question you would like and change any of the answers if you would like. So at least there's a bit of an advantage there. If you get through the exam and you suddenly realize on question 30 helps you answer question number 2, you can go back to question number 2 and fix your bad answer so that when you finally submit your exam, you get the credit for that question. And that's just something that's nice to have. But the actual grading process, completely hidden. There have been people, for example, that have posited that the performance-based questions must be worth more than a multiple choice question. I guess there's some logic there, but how do you know? It could very well be that performance-based questions are worth less than a multiple choice question. Or what is the ratio? Is it 2 to 1? Is it 1.5 to 1? And each time you look at a multiple choice question, it's going to be a different set of points anyway. So you really can't even compare it that way either. You can start to see where this becomes relatively complicated if you're trying to reverse engineer it because you have no visibility into the process. My recommendation when it comes to the grading of the exam is to let it go. Let it go. That's what I'm saying. Is just release that into the universe. Don't let it wear you down. Don't even consider that it's something that you should consider. That is something that you have no control over. You have no visibility into it. And when it's over, you have no way to know how they calculated it even then. So I would say it's an interesting process to think about. I guess from a trying to reverse engineer it. That's just something we like to do. We're problem solvers. If you're in IT, you're a problem solver. You like puzzles. You like to solve puzzles. Well, this is certainly a puzzle. The problem is that this is like the meaning of the universe kind of puzzle. You are never going to be able to answer this question. So I would recommend, although there may be ways that you could maybe think about it or reverse engineer it, or maybe they do it that way, or maybe they don't do it that way. I'm going to tell you, just don't even worry about it. Don't put yourself in that position. You're never going to figure it out anyway. So if that's the case, why even bother? Spend your cycles studying those exam objectives, brushing up on your port numbers, understanding more about static routing, figuring out more details about DHCP. That's what you should just do. And don't worry so much about the inner workings of the machine. It's one, for example, my better half tells me all the time, Mrs. Professor Messer often says, I don't know how the car works. I put the key in, I turn it on, it drives down the road. But I know how the car works because I might want to go in there and modify something or update it. I guess we don't really rebuild our carburetors anymore. But once upon a time, you could actually work on a car and do things with it. Well, that's a good example of something where even if you know the internals of it, doesn't help you much anymore. And for many people, they have no idea how it works anyway. So don't worry about it. Just let that one go and I think you'll be okay. Let's keep going down this list. This is along the same lines. Let's all commiserate together with my good friend Anonymous, who says, I recently took my Network Plus and made a 619. Obviously, we need a 720 to pass our exam. So my condolences on that attempt. The question from Anonymous is, do you think I should try to study more for the old test or cut my losses and take the N10-009 instead? Well, I think there is a point where you might want to cut your losses, but I think that's really after the exam is retired, or it may be a case where you can't take the exam any longer. Let me explain what I mean. So first, let's talk about taking CompTIA exams and how you would take CompTIA exams. There is a renewal, or not a renewal policy, but a retake policy for the CompTIA exams. And you can find that if you type in CompTIA retake policy. So let's see if I could, here's at least a page with one of the frequently asked questions on it. And it asks, what are the exam retake policies for client proctored exams? And by the way, this is the same for non-client proctored exams, or I guess really for in-person and online. This covers both of those. It's really what I was trying to say. Now this says the following retake policies will be enforced for CompTIA client proctored exam, the client for blah, blah, blah. Failed attempts. If a client fails an exam the first time, he or she may take the exam a second time with no restrictions. That means if you failed, you can immediately schedule an exam as soon as possible. Take it 5 minutes later if it's available. Take it the next day. You can take these exams back to back. If you fail the first one, you can take the second one, no problem. Here's a problem for some of us, however. I mentioned earlier that the N10-008 exam retires in 10 days. It retires on the 20th. Well, let's say you failed the first time, and let's say you took it the next day and you failed the second time. If a candidate fails on the second attempt or on any subsequent attempt after that, I guess that's redundant how I just said that, he or she must wait at least 14 calendar days before taking the exam again. That means if you took the exam yesterday and you failed, and you take the exam today and you fail, you can't take the N10-008 exam again. It will retire before you have a chance to take the exam again. So there are some situations where taking this exam and cutting your losses, so to speak, you're kind of forced into it at that point. If you can't take the current N10-008, then your only choice is the N10-009. I would recommend that if you are planning to take, or you are working along taking the N10-008, and you can still take that exam version before it's retired, that's what you've been studying this whole time, you've still got 10 days left. I would recommend taking the 008 again. Well, why is that? Let's have a look, because I have a picture. So here's the picture. This picture is a comparison of the N10-008 exam. That's the circle on the left in this Venn diagram. The N10-009 is the circle on the right. Now, the size of the circles is associated with the number of objectives that are listed out, all of those bullets you saw in the CompTIA exam objectives. That's right. I counted every single one of them. And I was able to compare. I went through the process of comparing every bullet on the N10-008 with every bullet on the N10-009. So I did a lot of comparisons here. And I not only compared what was new, I compared what was dropped. And based on that, I created this Venn diagram. So you can see the N10-008 is 590 objectives, plus or minus. I rounded that one just a little bit. The N10-009, 430 objectives. And as I put here, the N10-009 contains 27% fewer objectives than the N10-008. I don't necessarily like comparing things by percentages, but I think here by looking at both of these numbers, you really get the real numbers out of it. Plus you can put it into context. So in this particular case, I don't mind doing percentages so much. And you can see visually, this is 590 pixels high. This one is 430 pixels high. This is to scale intentionally. That was the idea of this Venn diagram, is to really give you a visual on the differences here. So you can see for N10-008, you studied quite a bit of content, and it's a little bit less content for the 009. Some people might argue the 009 is a little bit easier because there's fewer things to study. I don't necessarily agree with that logic. There's obviously logic there that does apply, but I think there's a balance that CompTIA does with the difficulty level of the questions that effectively make these very similar to each other in their difficulty, just so you are aware. I can't qualify that because I don't have the questions in front of me to show you. Nobody does, but that at least gives you some perspective there. Another interesting part of this, and the reason I say if you've been studying for the 008 and you can still take the 008 exam, go take that, is that there's a lot of material here that doesn't show up in the 009. So you've been studying these 590 objectives. 300 of those objectives, effectively half of the exam, is only found in the N10-008. So if you move to the 009, half of what you've learned you're not going to use anymore. It's almost a waste in many ways. Now, what was changed is a different set of questions, and we can talk a little bit about that, but that's one reason I say stick with the 008 content. The 009 content, 140 of the objectives on the 009, or effectively a third of the new exam, is all new information. A third of it. That's a lot of content. 140 topics are brand new on the 009. If you've been studying the 008, you've never seen those topics before. So that adds to the amount of studying you're going to need to do. And in the middle, there's your sweet spot. If you have been studying for the 008 and you really do want to move over to the 009, 2/3 of the exam of the 009, 290 topics, are shared between the two. So at least there's a little bit that we don't have to refresh ourselves on. We already, if you've been studying the 008, you already know this content, or you should. And the only thing you would have to learn is the 140, is the extra 33%, the extra third of the exam, to bring you up to speed with everything you would need to know for the 009. So although they are both Network Plus, and although this is just one version later than the 008, there are still some significant things we have to learn here. There's still quite a bit of content we still have to work on. So I would tell you, if you are planning to make this move, keep that in mind. This is also the reason, by the way, that I am always telling you, make sure you study from materials that match the version of the exam that you're planning to take. And this is a great explanation why. Imagine studying for the 008 and you walk in to take the 009. A third of the exam will be topics you've never seen before. That's enough to fail on these exams. Same thing happens if you've been studying for the 009. You walk in to take the 008 exam, half of the exam you've never seen before. You're failing that one, no question. So that's why I tell you, always make sure that if you're going to take the N10-008 exam, that all of your study materials have been specifically written for the N10-008. If you're planning to take the 009 exam, make sure that all of your study materials have specifically been written for the N10-009. That way you know they're going to cover everything that is in the circle specific to your particular exam. And so back to that question that was asked earlier, if you took the Network Plus, you just haven't passed it yet, you might still have an opportunity here. If you haven't failed it twice, you could still take this exam again. You have one more chance to take this exam again. I think you take the current version that you've been studying for. Now, if you've had it, you're just sick of the 008, maybe mentally the 008 has beaten you down and you're looking at the 009 as a green field that doesn't have any type of deadlines or restrictions, and it just makes you feel better. It gives you a little bit less stress to deal with that. That's a difficult argument. It's hard for me to argue with that. I would say mentally, if that's where you are and you really just don't want to spend the money going through this again to only potentially be disappointed on the other side, and really the pressure of the time frame, maybe that's just too much for you. That you'd rather take the holiday season, have some eggnog, have some cookies, see the family, do a little visit. Things are a little more casual during the holidays at work. Maybe this is a chance for you to kind of push everything out into 2025. Obviously, there's some negatives there as well, because other people are going to get that Network Plus certification and you're not going to have it. And you might be going after the same jobs that they're going after. So there are downsides to waiting. There are downsides to pushing off to a different version as well. You have to do the balancing act for you, though. And I can appreciate both sides of that one. I don't have a hard and fast rule for this, but if you've already spent all this time on the N10-008, you've already bought all the N10-008 materials, you've already gone through all of those exam objectives over and over, and you've already taken the exam. You know what the exam is going to look like. At least have a feel for it, a little bit of flavor of it. I think there's some great advantages for taking the exam again. So if it were me, I'd be leaning into the 008 and not cutting my losses, so to speak. I don't think it's a cutting of losses, quite honestly. I think taking the 009 adds to your losses. You have to buy new study materials. You have to go through and spend more of your time to go through that process. You might be able, with some very focused studying, you might be able to pass that exam on this next try, and now you're done. Think of it that way. You have to see it for that to happen. So you should see that in yourself. It's hard work. It's not an easy exam. I get it. But there might be some very good reasons to focus on the current version, get your Network Plus certification, get it done, and now you don't have to worry about it anymore. So that's probably what I would do. That's not a hard and fast rule, and I can completely understand if you decide instead to shift over to the 009, but you should at least now understand really what the advantages and disadvantages would be, and now you can make an educated decision on that. Let's keep going through these questions that you have. We have time left. Thank you, chat room, for hanging in there with us. Let's keep going in this list. We've already, in fact, the number of people have asked. First, Anonymous, thank you for sending that question in, because a number of questions in here effectively are asking the same thing. Should I be going over there? Should I be looking at the new version? New is not always better. New is just new. Ultimately, as I mentioned, if you took the N10-008 exam today and passed it, you would be Network Plus certified. If you took the 009 exam today and passed it, you would be Network Plus certified. It's the same certification. You've earned the same piece of paper. There's no difference in the final end game here. What you earn is identical regardless what set of questions you're taking to get to that end station, to that end point. So that's what best advice I can give you is kind of look at both sides, figure out what makes sense for you, and go with that. More questions. And just to be clear, good question in the chat room. You only need to take one of these. You do not need to take the 008 and then somehow take the 009. I think some people might feel that because the 008 is retiring, that they then would have to take the 009, even if they pass the 008 exam. You don't. The 008 and 009 are referring to the exam questions, the exam pool that you are being selected from to be able to take the exam. It's the exam. Once you pass your exam, you're now Network Plus certified. You're not 008 certified. You're not 009 certified. You're Network Plus certified. Think of it this way. I took my Network Plus exam, I don't know, a number of years ago. We'll just say that. More than 3 years ago, I took my Network Plus exam. If I had indeed renewed that certification every 3 years, I would still be Network Plus certified. And there are people that have done that. They've had their Network Plus certification for 10 years. They are still Network Plus certified. If you passed your N10-009 exam today, you would also be Network Plus certified. And you're just as Network Plus certified as the person who has had their certification for 10 years. It's the same credential. There's no versioning to it. It's just Network Plus, just so you're aware. So you don't get any special benefits by taking a newer version of the question bank. All you do is have a different set of questions that you have to study for. That's the only difference. And thankfully, I say thankfully from my perspective, on December the 20th, it won't matter anyway. Everybody has to take the 009. That's a good day for me, by the way. I can finally stop answering the questions about 008. I say finally, it's kind of sad because I have over the years built all of this 008 content, and then on one day of the year, it now is all worthless. So that keeps you humble. All of it's gone. You have to rebuild from the ground up every 3 years to make that happen. What was I thinking? But here we are. That's the way it works. It's not as bad as that sounds, but that's just something that's a part of the process. You just have to make sure you always stay up to date with those sets of exam objectives. It is an important part of this. Let's keep going through this list. Others that are here, plenty to go through. This one is, there's a lot of questions that I'm receiving in this list that talk about, do I need to know this? Do I need to know that? Do I need to know another thing? Is it important to know these things? And this kind of goes along the lines of the questions that people will ask about, I know I have to know port numbers. I know I have to know some level of subnetting, but do I need to know this thing? Or do I need to know that thing? Is it important to know this? Well, all of those answers are already in the exam objectives. Anytime you are at a point where you're wondering, is that topic on the exam? If it's listed in this set of exam objectives, it's on the exam. So for example, here's a section 2.4. Explain important factors of physical installations. You need to know locations, which would be the intermediate distribution frame, or IDF. You may have heard that term. You might have also heard the term main distribution frame, or MDF. I mentioned earlier, nobody even knows what these names are anymore. And in fact, we rarely even spell them out and say what they are to other people. Did you put that into the main distribution frame? Nobody ever says this. In fact, it's kind of rare these days to hear somebody say, is it in the MDF? People do still use those terms, however, and you do need to know what they are. So you will run into that. Most of the time, people are saying, hey, is that in the data center, or did we put it on the 5th floor closet? That's usually what we end up saying these days, because these are kind of antiquated terms that have just stuck around and won't go away. We also need to know rack size, port side exhaust / intake. With some people, this is super important. In some people's networks, that's super important. You'll learn why when you go through that section. Cabling, which includes patch panels and fiber distribution panels. Is it lockable? How about a UPS? An uninterruptible power supply? How about a power distribution unit or a PDU? We need to understand power load and voltage, and we need to also understand humidity, fire suppression, and temperature. Now, if somebody shows up and says, hey, do we need to know about the different types of fire extinguishers? Well, none of them are listed here. We do have an option in here for fire suppression. How is fire suppression used in our big data centers today? What type of fire suppression do we have? What will we expect to see if we walked into a large data center? But there's no mention on here of a type A, a type C. There's none of the details. And at some point with these exams, you can't keep digging down lower into this mix. CompTIA tends to be very specific with their exam objectives. Let me give you an example. We'll go back to section 1, and there's a section here that talks about explain common networking ports, protocol services, and traffic types. And it lists out very specific protocols. Whoops, sorry about that. Very specific protocols and very specific port numbers. So if somebody shows up and says, I've got a page of 100 port numbers and I'm busy memorizing them for my exam. Yeah, but the exam objectives have like 25 port numbers on it. That's it. And many of them are connected to each other, like port 20 and 21, port 67 and 68, 161 and 162. And I'd argue even port 80 and port 443 are somewhat linked. So a lot of these are sort of bundled together. There's really not that many to memorize. But if somebody showed up and said, I'm memorizing 100 port numbers, someone gave me a sheet, it's got 100 port numbers on it, we only need to know 25 of those, the ones that are listed here. You don't need to go outside the scope. CompTIA does a very good job of sticking to the objectives, thankfully, so that when we are studying, we only need to study the topics that are in this list. Now, an argument there that I hear quite often is that people will say, yeah, but our fire suppression, we have these fire extinguishers on the wall. They do have a type, and certain fire extinguishers work better against certain types of fires. That's absolutely true. And it may be that if you manage or work in a data center, that it's important for you to know that. But for the exam, you don't need to know that because it is not specifically listed in the exam objectives. It is very unusual, very rare, and so rare that it is unimportant when CompTIA tends to go outside the scope of the objectives. And often you'll get a question that isn't even in the list of objectives. Sometimes they are testing you so that they are evaluating. They're running their own tests. Then very often those questions don't actually have any points associated with them, just so you are aware of that. So that is a good example, though, of understanding the objectives. And I get criticism from folks that say, you really need to go into more detail about the fire extinguishers so we can really understand. Well, if I did that, we're now moving into a part of that particular technology that has nothing to do with passing the Network Plus exam. And I'm not saying that that isn't important, because obviously it is. Understanding all of the surrounding technologies around what we're learning with Network Plus are not just important, you will need to know them in your career as you progress through and start moving up in the ranks of information technology. You'll need to learn those other topics. You'll need to learn about the things that aren't covered on this exam. But the point of doing this is so that you can first get that certification and put it in your pocket and go get the job. There will be plenty of time to go outside the scope of the exam. Trust me. The goal for you right now is to learn what you need to learn to pass this exam. And I tell people all the time, if you learn everything that is listed in this set of exam objectives and nothing else, if you stick to these objectives, you know every single topic, you use it as a checklist, you can explain any one of these bullets to yourself or someone else, then you will sit down for this exam and you will crush it. You will do fine. You will pass your exam if you know everything in this sheet. So even if you don't know the different types of fire extinguishers, you still passed your exam. That's our point with this. And I guess if people are going to tell me that that's a problem with the training, well, I guess I'll take that, because our point with this is to get you the tools you need to pass this certification. And then there's other topics and other YouTube channels and other places you can go where we can go beyond the scope of this. And you should, because it's fun. I love technology, and I've enjoyed working in the technology field and being in the trenches and walking through the data centers and doing the network troubleshooting and understanding and implementing these large scale enterprise firewalls. It is fascinating. And it's a lot of fun to solve problems and implement these technologies. And you're going to continue to learn throughout your career. And I think that's something that maybe people don't sometimes really understand, is you take the certification. Oh, you're not done yet. You're just getting started. If you've ever been in a game and you're leveling up in the game, and you finally get to the max level in the game, people will sometimes tell you, now the game really starts. And they're right. The end game is where really all the fun happens. The first part's also kind of fun, but it's a different type of fun. Well, this is the first part. You're leveling up right now. You're getting that certification, getting it in your pocket, getting that job, or getting that better job. But now the fun really starts. And you will, throughout your IT career, wherever you go, whatever you do, you will always be working towards learning, understanding, learning more, adding to it. There's a constant learning process in IT that I think a number of people perhaps don't really understand, is that it's not just learning what's in the cert. This is just something to get you leveling up to the next level. You're going to continue to learn. You're going to continue to read. You're going to continue to go to training. You're going to continue to watch videos and come up with new ways to implement these technologies. And there will be new technologies coming down the line. 5 years from now, there will be new things, and we all have to learn them. We all start at ground zero and have to work our way up. This will happen throughout your entire career. So if you're someone who doesn't like the process of learning, this might not be for you. But if you're someone who really enjoys getting into these technologies, understanding how to implement, understanding what they do, troubleshooting them, solving problems with them, doing unique and interesting things with them, this is a great place to be. And I've enjoyed this career from the very beginning, and it haven't really missed anything yet. We're just getting started. I often say we're just starting to have fun. There's always something new happening and new things to go through. And I enjoy doing it, probably because of that, just because it's a lot of fun. Let's see what other questions you have. I do have a bit more time, so let's keep going through this list and see what others are here. This is a very common question worth talking about, and I think everybody has a different opinion of it. Muhammad writes, as well as using your notes and your videos, would you recommend doing labs to enhance my knowledge before the exam? I've given myself 8 weeks before my exam. Is this a realistic target? Well, I can't answer the last question because every person has a different learning cycle they go through. And everybody comes into the Network Plus certification with a different knowledge base, with a different foundation that they're building on. If you've never touched anything with technology before, it might take more than 8 weeks. I would say the average, though, for most people taking the Network Plus exam is around 2 to 3 months. That's probably a pretty good average based on what I have seen with people coming through and taking this exam. But if people I've worked with before might be able to walk into the room, spend a week going through the exam objectives, and go take the test, and they're done. But these are people that have been in the industry for years. They've already been doing networking. They've already implemented switches. They already know about routing protocols. They've already done troubleshooting on networks. That makes it very easy for them to walk in. On the same way, it may not be about what you know about technology. It may be about the world around you. We're getting into the holiday season, and in the holiday season, things tend to slow down. We have other responsibilities we have to take care of. We have to go visit family. There's time out of our schedule. And because of that, we may not be able to study as much as we're used to. So during the holiday, we may tack on another month to be able to get through this study process. Or it may be different. It may be that everything's slowing down that gives us more time to study. It just depends on your personal scenario, your personal time management. Someone like me, I have very little time to study those types of things. So when I have to study for a certification or anything else, it takes me an extended amount of time. If I had to take the Network Plus from ground zero right now with my schedule, it's going to take me 6 months. I just know that it's going to take 6 months. And so I can schedule that out for that 6-month period. And at the end of 6 months, we'll see where we are. But I'm not going to there's no way I'd be able to take it in 8 weeks. But you very well could be. So everybody's a little bit different. Everybody has their own process. Everybody has their own chaos happening around them. And so all of this goes into that calculation of how long is it going to take. I think if you are very focused, 8 weeks is a perfectly reasonable time frame, as long as you have the time to study on it. Now, about the first part of this, which is recommend doing labs to enhance your knowledge. For those of you that have watched my videos on how you're able to study for these courses and these certifications, whether it's CompTIA or anything else, I really have 4 different study materials and processes that I always recommend. And the first one is watch some good videos. Also get a good book. And you may be thinking, well, if I have videos, why do I need a book? And if I have a book, why do I need videos? That's because the videos teach you in a particular way. It's a very visual way. You can watch somebody going through the commands and see what the responses are and get a feel for what that command is supposed to do, and gives you a little insight into other pieces of information that are something that you really can't get from the written form. However, books are really dense. You can read through a chapter in a book and you will have received much more information than watching a video, because videos teach you in a different way. Books provide data in a completely different way, but the book isn't going to demonstrate something for you. You won't see it happening in real time. You don't have these little tidbits of information that have been put into the book. That's something you can only get on the video side. So both of those are important. They teach you in a different way. They fire a different synapse in your brain, and maybe both of them together really make a difference. The third thing I often tell people, the third thing that you would want to use and get is some quality hands-on. Get some labs. Go through the process. Like today, we went through the process of looking at the IP address on a device, performing a name resolution, and then performing a trace route. We did that on our screen. We sat there and demonstrated the process. We typed it in. We saw it happening. That was important, because actually doing it, I think, fires a completely different set of synapses. There's a muscle memory of typing it in, seeing the information on the screen, and interpreting the response of that. That is something you don't get in a video and you don't get in a book. So I think labs are useful. The fourth thing that I think is all 4 of these are important. Some people might not need all 4. Some people might only use 3. Some might only use 2. Some might only use 1. So you have a number of options there to choose from. But what I normally will tell people, that 4th thing is to test yourself. Get some Q&A, get some good practice exams. I realize I don't have any practice exams yet for the N10-009. Hopefully we'll get some here at some point. I don't want to say too much, at least not yet. But that is the 4th one you would do. Usually I save that to last, because I think testing yourself really involves taking everything you've learned in the videos, in the book, and in the hands-on, and then seeing if you can apply it. And I think that's a good test. That's one of the reasons that I really focus on questions that roll up and give you a practice of a real exam. I think that's really useful. But get the questions wherever you can. Just get high quality questions that are legitimate. It's kind of important too. So all four of those are the four elements that I think make up a perfect set of study materials. Good videos, good book, plenty of hands-on, lots of Q&A. Stick to those four and I think you'll be fine. And I think 8 weeks is a perfectly reasonable target depending on your scenario. But I think most of us, that's probably a pretty good scenario too. I know we're at the top of the hour. Let's fit in one. We got so many questions. I want to see if I can fit in a couple more that is in this list and see if I can really focus in on what people are trying to do. Let's see. Okay, here's one. I get this question quite a bit, so this is a nice one to finish up on. We don't talk very much in the study groups about subnetting, and that's not because I don't like subnetting. We have done subnetting questions before in the study group, but if you were to look at the exam objectives, let's do this real quick just so I can make my point with this. And we were to look at all of the exam objectives. We've gone through this before. So section 1, section 2, section 3, and section 4, and section 5. So in Network Plus, we have, as we mentioned on the N10-009, we have almost 500 exam objectives that are in here. So when we start looking at all of these objectives, and we want to know about subnetting, if you go down to section 1.7, there's a section in here that talks about subnetting. And it goes through two different things here: variable length subnet mask, VLSM, and classless interdomain routing CIDR, which are sort of the same topic here. Those are the two bullets in this list of 480 bullets or so that have anything to do with subnetting. Which means on your Network Plus exam, where you get 90 questions max, it's very possible on your exam, you might get one question on subnetting. You might get 2. Maybe you get 3. Many people get 0. Just statistically, there's not going to be an enormous number of subnetting questions on this exam. So back to this question that says, during the exam, would I be required to use the magic number subnetting or 7-second subnetting? Or are these just the strategies I will choose, and I can choose which one I find easier in order to answer the question? So this is sort of the challenge with subnetting, that if you're just getting into the world of networking and you're faced with a math problem right out of the gate, for many people, that's an enormous turnoff. That's a big negative. I have to do math, powers of 2, there's multiplication, you might have to divide, there's certainly addition and subtraction. There's a lot going on there. And as we've seen, and I step you through this in my course, I show you what subnetting is, why it needs to be used, and we perform those calculations by converting decimal to binary, because subnetting all happens at the binary level. Show you how the binary calculations take place, and then we convert everything back to decimal. But in the world of IT, and especially on your timed certification exam, you don't have time to convert everything to binary, perform the binary calculation, and convert everything back to decimal again. It just takes too long to do that. You have to write it all out, and now you're wasting time. You only have so much time on these exams. The clock is ticking. So that's why we've created a lot of these shortcuts, because if you're in a meeting and you're talking about a strategy for deploying a new network or converting over an existing network, or do we take all the printers and put them on their own VLANs? Oh, that's a great idea. What subnet should we use for that? What's the address? What's the subnet mask we would use on that one? I need to configure that on the router today. What is the IP address and subnet mask, and what range would that consist of? Do we have enough IP addresses to be able to cover all the printers? That's a very good practical example of why we need to be able to subnet in our head. In many cases, you will find people simply using an online calculator for subnetting. They'll figure it out from there, and that's not an unreasonable thing to do. It's a nice double check. But if you're in a meeting, you're going to find that doing this in your head provides you with, first, a lot of speed, But now you can start going through different scenarios because you can calculate this out so quickly. And although it doesn't seem like it right now, you will find that there will be a point where subnetting starts to click. And you're like, oh, I see the formula in my head. I can see the pattern emerging out of the chaos. I can now understand what we're doing and how that fits. And you'll also find the more you use a particular subnet mask, the more it becomes familiar to you. For example, I've mentioned earlier, I worked in an organization where we had a 255.255.255.192 subnet mask. So effectively 2 bits into the last octet. And you think, oh, 2 bits in the last octet, I have to do all these calculations. Well, no, once you work with that for a day or two or a week, and I worked there for years, you start to see the pattern and it starts to become automatic. And I can subnet a 255.255.192 network in my sleep. I just know where the different delineations are for that network. And I know it instantly if I'm talking about that particular subnet mask. So don't worry right now that it seems clunky that you're doing a shortcut of some kind. You're using the magic number shortcut. You're using the 7-second shortcut. You're using a third-party shortcut. There's lots of shortcuts out there. They all effectively use the same process. This type of math is very easy once you start to see it laid out. But you'll start to find that even the shortcuts start getting faster. And you're starting to understand exactly where the dividing line is in all of these subnets. And it does become a lot more second nature. You don't even start to think about it anymore. And by the way, we mess up subnetting in the real world all the time. All the time. One of the last jobs I had was working for a next generation firewall company. I was a systems engineer. I was responsible for bringing in and installing evaluation equipment, connecting to Active Directory infrastructures, building out IPsec tunnels, building out in-station VPN configurations. All of these, there's like 5 different subnets I just mentioned that had to be configured in the firewall. And because of that, I had to work a lot with and liaison with my customers and say, okay, what IP address do we set as the management interface? And they go, okay, use this IP address, this subnet mask, and this default gateway. And I said, great. And I go back and I look at it. I go, wait, the default gateway you gave me isn't in the same subnet as the IP address you gave me. And they go, oh, yeah, sorry, that should be a 1, not a 100. Like, oh, okay. We got it wrong. It got by both of us. He handed it to me. I just glanced at it. We didn't even know. It happens all the time. It's just just a math problem. It's just a fix we need to do. Oh, that's a 1. Okay. We would have figured it out because when you put it into the firewall tells you, well, that's not right. You need to fix that. That's not going to work. At least there's some logic built into the systems we are using to prevent any type of disaster from occurring. But there's a really good example of how we get it wrong all the time. Subnet math is difficult for all of us. It's something that you kind of have to figure out and be accustomed to, because occasionally you walk into a network and they're not using a .192. They're using a .128. They're using a .252. They're using something else. Or maybe it's in the 3rd subnet, not the 4th subnet. Okay, now I have to calculate. Now what is that? And I got to add on the last octet. You can see how this might cause problems. So to this question, it's a perfectly valid question. Should I use magic numbers? Should I use 7-second? Use whatever you can to make the process as fast as possible. If you get a Cisco book, their official Cisco Press book uses the magic number method. That's why I included it with my course, because I think that is something that if you continue down the road of doing networking, you will probably need or you will run into the magic number method. It's not unusual. But my problem with the magic number method and a number of different shortcuts is that they expect you to be able to calculate powers of 2 in your head. And generally, if I'm sitting here and we're having a very casual conversation, I could probably do that. But if I'm in an exam and I have to do it now, and the clock is ticking, and there's a lot of numbers on the screen, and I have to calculate out what the powers of 2 to the 5, 2 to the 6, I don't know where the delineation is between one subnet and I just get overwhelmed. There's too much anxiety for me. I can't handle it. I'm not a good test taker. You found my kryptonite. I cannot take the test. The time constraint, there's a concern for me from a math perspective that I've got the math wrong. Even when I get the math right, I'm still worried I got the math wrong. See where the problem is? Even when I get it right and calculate the powers of 2 correctly, I don't believe I calculated the powers of 2 correctly. This is the problem. The problem with being someone who is a perfectionist is they're never perfect, or they think they're never perfect. They're never perfect. So what I did was create kind of an adjunct to the magic number method and a number of other methods that I use that would not require any math other than subtract 1 or add 1, which I think anyone can do, and I can do. And that's the method I used on my Cisco exams. Because Cisco exams, you're going to be doing 30 subnetting problems before the exam is over, maybe more. And with the 7-second process, I've already written out my chart really quick. It took me 60 seconds to get the chart written out. Now that chart I can use for the rest of my exam. And that will save me 60 seconds, no question. Not only that, because there is no math, there's no worry that I calculated something wrong. And I know when I finally get the answer and I go, the answer, doop, 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 there's the answer. My 7 seconds only takes 2 or 3. Once you start doing it, it takes a lot less than 7. Burp, burp, burp. Yep, there's the answer. There's the subnet. Yep, answer B, next. Because remember, on the Cisco exam, you can't go backwards. Adding to the anxiety. Thank you, Cisco. As if I didn't need any more. There it is. But that was why I created that format, so that I would not have to do math. It's me being lazy and trying to get rid of a lot of the anxiety. So that's the focus. That's why I have both of those in my course. Maybe you don't like either of them. Maybe you think the magic number method, and by the way, you don't get to see these because I just removed them from my YouTube channel. There are people that will put comments into the magic number video saying, this is the worst method ever. Why would you ever use this? Then there are people that will put comments into the 7-second method and say, this is the worst method ever. Why would you ever use this? Both of them are probably right. Neither of these is perfect. It's not designed to be. And everybody has a different flow of how they like to do subnetting. Some people can do math in their heads and they're not worried about it. That would not be me. Some people can... people do not like to do math and they deal with the worry that the math isn't right. That's me. The magic number method is mine. So I'm not saying you should use any of these. And I'm not saying that one is better than the other. And I'm not saying that you have to use a shortcut method. You should find the one that works for you. Find the process that makes sense for you. Some people just like visualizing a pizza. How am I going to cut up the pizza? Because it's always even slices. So is the pizza cut up into 2 pieces? Is it cut into 4? Is it cut into 8? You get to figure that out. The pizza thing kind of breaks down after a while because there's only so many size of the pizza slices you would use, but the concept is the same. Find the method that works for you. That's what you should choose. So when you ask in this question, should I just choose which I find easier to answer the question? Absolutely. Find the one that works for you. And maybe you build your own. Maybe you have your own shortcut method that you've used. You've grabbed magic number. You've taken 7-second. You've taken other formats. You've kind of melted them together. And you've now created the way that works for you. That's great. That's fine. You're not stuck having to do either of the ones I present to you. I just wanted to give you options, kind of take you down the road of what makes sense when it comes to subnetting, and then you can decide what the most important part is. But again, you might get one subnetting question on the exam. You might get no subnetting questions on the exam. You might get 2 or 3. And if subnetting becomes an enormous problem for you, if subnetting becomes that thing that you just can't get over, you cannot, for some reason, the math isn't working, you can't get over it. And I've had people send me emails. I've been working on subnetting for 2 weeks and I just can't get it. If that's you, I really don't feel bad telling you, just don't do any more subnetting. Just drop it. It's not for you. Don't worry about it right now. You could have spent those 2 weeks studying a lot of other things for this exam and being much farther along. Ultimately, you might not get any questions. And I do get emails from those folks too that say, I spent weeks studying subnetting. I took my exam and got no subnetting questions. I'm so angry. Well, I guess I'd be a little bit upset too if I spent all that time. But it's all relative. Look at the exam objectives, see how much of that is on the exam, and then you need to make the decision on whether you spend more time studying on that particular topic, or let's go study some other things where I could actually learn those and I might actually get some questions about them and be able to answer those questions on the actual exam. So I know that's sort of an odd bit of advice, which is don't study. That's not what I'm saying, but you know what I'm saying. If you've just hit that wall and you realize I can't get through this wall, you pivot, go over here, go learn more things. All of this could potentially be on the exam. So go learn those things. I think that's a better approach than just trying over and over and over again, because by the way, you will eventually learn subnetting. I know you think it's not going to happen, that it's too challenging. There's too many variables involved. You will get it. It'll be one of those things where you wake out of a sleep and you think, that's what they meant. That's click. There's an audible clicking noise that occurs. Click. Oh, that's okay. Now I see. Maybe it just has to set in. We have to soak in a little while before it finally gets in and we can figure that piece out. So yes, I would absolutely think that's probably a good approach for you. Find the things that make sense for you in this list. I think if you're somebody who is struggling with exam objectives, understanding subnetting, or any other part of the objectives, it's probably perfectly reasonable to cut that little piece out for the time being and focus on the rest of the exam. That may be a better use of your time. And as we all know, with this exam, time management, pretty important. And it won't be the last time you deal with subnetting anyway. You're going to run into it the rest of your career. It's going to be an important part of the things you learn. And ultimately, it's going to click for you. It's not going to be a problem in the future anyway. You will figure it out. Do not worry. Well, I think that's a great place to finish up. Thank you so much for joining us on our live stream today. Thank you for being here in the first hour and answering those questions I presented to you. We have many more for you. We'll do this again in January. We can't wait to come back in 2025 with another year of Network Plus. There's always something interesting that's going on. And of course, we have another live stream 2 days from now. If you're working on Security Plus or just like to hang out with us, you're more than welcome to join us on that live stream. That is Thursday at 12 noon Eastern Time. You can always find it on our YouTube channel and our calendar at professormesser.com/calendar. If you're not going to join us for that last stream of the year, let me tell you, thank you so much for an amazing 2024. This has been a ridiculous year, and I mean that in the best possible way. We have had such fun this year. We have been able to bring these technologies and these learning videos to people all over the world. We couldn't do that without you and your support. So thank you so much for your ongoing support. I hope everybody has a fantastic holiday season. We'll see you in 2025. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on the Network Plus Study Group.